Hey there, so in this session, we're going to be going over the Supervisor Reasonable Suspicion Drug and Alcohol Training. It is required for any person in your company that has kind of control over what a driver does. You know, if they can pull them in and out of a truck based on safety performance issues, any DER that you have in your company should have this training. So with that being said, let's just get right to it. Okay, so in the training, we're going to be discussing why does your company need this training, what your responsibilities are, definitions, some acronyms, what are the FMCSA drug and alcohol requirements, understanding the drug and alcohol testing process, what to look for with your employees, and process when the suspicion is present. So we're going to be covering all of these things plus a bunch more. So the rules for supervisor training is you only need this training one time. I'm just going to say this right up front. There's a ton of companies out there who do the training and then they, email you and kind of harass you every year saying it's expired. It doesn't expire. Once you take this training, it does not expire as long as it meets the requirements of FMCSA guidelines. It doesn't actually expire. I do recommend that every couple of years you actually take it again, just as a refresher. So any supervisors, like I said, that have control over what a driver does, if they're supervising that driver, then they're required to have this training. So it's not just one person in the company that has to have this training, it's any supervisor. As a supervisor, if you can show proof of previous reasonable suspicion drug and alcohol training, like I said, same thing, you only have to do this once. So if you have taken it before, you don't have to take it again. Okay, so why does your company have a drug and alcohol program in the first place? Why do you need supervisor training? Why are you doing this? For one, it's regulated. You want to provide a drug-free workplace. You want to improve the safety of your drivers and, the safety of the public, honestly. And you have to comply with federal regulations, whether they're state, federal. Of course, these are federal regulations. Almost all states have adopted the federal regulations as far as drug and alcohol testing goes. And local regulations. Plus, it's just the right thing to do. I mean, you don't want to have a company policy where everybody can just smoke weed all day long and then get in a truck and drive and, drive an 80,000-pound vehicle. All right, so here is your responsibilities. You cannot use people who have drugs or alcohol in their systems. If they have, and whether you test them, if you knowingly have anybody that's on drugs or alcohol operating a commercial motor vehicle, whether they go well below the guidelines or not, the requirements, like the 0.08 or the 0.04 for commercial motor vehicle purposes, they can't be driving. You cannot use people who have failed or refused a drug test or an alcohol test. If your company policy, say you have an open door policy, or say you have a policy that you do allow that and you do allow for SAP programs, so we're going to get into SAP programs, then that's why I have that kind of little asterisk or the little star there, is because there are exceptions to that, but it must be in your company policy, and you have to basically define exactly how that's going to work. You must respond to inquiring prospective employers. So all of that, getting information from previous employers, you also have to respond whenever somebody requests information from you. So you'll be getting that if you haven't already received that, and it might not be your department, it might be the HR department, but whenever they ask you, if they're a CDL driver and they're asking you about their drug and alcohol testing information, they have a right to that information. So there is a process that has to be done. The driver has to sign a release and all that information. But at the end of the day, if they're following the guidelines, then you have to respond to that. You must also educate your employees and supervisors about drug and alcohol use. So with employees and supervisors, they should all be signing that drug and alcohol policy receipt. Every person that operates a commercial motor vehicle has to sign that drug and alcohol policy receipt. So it's not just for CDL drivers that have to sign that receipt, but anybody, because you may have a non-DOT drug and alcohol policy that you implement for those non-CDL drivers. But CDL drivers do for sure. Non-CDL drivers, if you have a non-DOT drug and alcohol program, they need to be signing that as well. Okay, so know and abide by your company policy. I go into companies a lot and I see that yes, they have a policy, but they've never actually read it. So I open it up and I start validating that it meets all the requirements that are listed out, and it'll have other companies' names in there. It has information that that's in their policy, and they're not even close to following their own policy. So if you're one of those companies that got your template drug and alcohol policy from somebody else, maybe your collection site, maybe your TPA and consortium, make sure that you're actually reading it and editing to fit your company. Just because the collection company gave you, it's a template. So treat it as such. It is only a template, and you need to go in and edit it, and you need to make sure it fits your company policy requirements. Now, the FMCSA, the requirements are what they are. The guidelines are what they are. You can't change those. But there are certain cases, like, are you going to allow SAP program employees? So do you have a zero tolerance policy? What are you going to do if the negative dilutes come in? You know, you need to address those things in your company policy, and they need to fit everybody, and you have to make them uniform to fit everybody in your company. They all follow the same rules regardless of their status or whether they're the owner or the owner's son. It doesn't matter. So ensure that the company policy meets, like I said, FMCSA requirements. That's in part 382.601, and you can find it in B 1 through 11. Seek guidance from your HR department when dealing with drug and alcohol policy issues. If you are the HR department, then go back to your drug and alcohol policy and review that. Have DOT employees report immediately for drug and alcohol testing when instructed to do so. For one, you cannot tell them in advance that they're getting drug and alcohol tested. You can't. You are only to inform them of the drug and alcohol test if it's a random test as soon as they're ready to go. So don't call them and say, hey, when you get back to the yard in 3 hours, you're going to get a drug test. That's not how it's supposed to be. You don't tell them until they get back to the yard, and you say, hey, you got called for a drug test, so I need you to go right now. Or maybe wait until the next morning before they're about to come on duty, and you say, hey, before you go, I need you to go do this drug test, but you can't notify them in advance. Become informed about drug and alcohol misuse. I am going to show you some pictures of kind of what to look out for. So make sure employees receive your company's drug and alcohol policy and have them sign an acknowledgement form. Like I said, that is required by DOT. They have to have that drug and alcohol policy receipt, and if they don't have that and you don't have that signed in their file, you're going to be in violation of that. So all supervisors responsible for DOT safety sensitive employees trained in the required reasonable suspicion training have to have at least 1 hour alcohol and 1 hour of drug. So we're going to be looking through, what we're looking through is 49 CFR parts 40.3 for this particular section. And then the other part is going to be 49 part 382. So on the parts 40.3, this is the designated employer representative. That's probably you if you're watching this, or maybe it's your HR person. If you're a supervisor, your HR person is your DER. Whoever is the DER is the person who gets the random list or creates the random list and then disperses that out and says they're the ones who manage this program. So that might be you, and it might be somebody else in your company, but the DER is the designated employer representative. They manage the program. The MRO is the medical review officer. This is the doctor that is actually looking at the results and issuing the final result, whether it be a positive or negative. Chain of custody, COC, that is the document that the driver has to fill out whenever he gets to the collection facility, or, you know, if you do self-testing at your location, then you have probably seen chain of custody forms, or if you've gone for drug testing yourself, you filled out a chain of custody form. So it's the document that you're putting your name, your birth date, your social security number on, and you're signing it saying that you are agreeing to being tested. TPA is a third-party administrator. A consortium is a drug and alcohol random pool. So a lot of companies, they're both. It's TPA/consortium. So that's basically when you outsource it. And a lot of people think that third-party administrators and consortiums, that they're consultants. They're not consultants. And what I find is that a lot of them don't know regulation. They might know how to do collections. They might be very good at being a TPA in a consortium, but then you start asking them questions about what should be in the driver qualification file, or what should be this, and you start asking them DOT questions, like as it relates to your operations. They don't have a clue. They're all too happy to tell you the answer that they think it is, but then they end up getting companies in trouble. So consortium, like I said, that's the drug and alcohol random pool. Your consortium is the pool that, you know, all the drivers go into, and that's where they pull the names to decide who's getting random drug tested. The SAP is the substance abuse professional. So if a driver is to test positive or refuse a drug test, which technically is a positive, then they will have to be referred to a SAP, which is a counselor. It's a substance abuse professional. We're just going to briefly go over the SAP program and kind of what it means. Like I said, I'm going to briefly cover the substance abuse professional. It is a licensed physician or licensed certified psychologist, social worker, employee assistance professional. They've been trained specifically in drug and alcohol. SAPs have knowledge and clinical experience in the diagnosis and treatment. They're the ones that are going to diagnose. Because you took this training doesn't mean you're going to be able to diagnose somebody with alcoholism or being a drug addict. That's not what this training is for. SAPs actually have been trained specifically in that, and they are able to actually diagnose somebody. SAPs will suggest the proper course of action needed to assist employees in resolving problems with alcohol misuse or drug abuse. So like I said, they're the counselor. They're the ones that are going to be saying, no, I think this driver needs to be in this particular scenario for this long, and then we're going to monitor it from there. And you want them to be separate. You don't want to be one of those and then also be a supervisor. That it doesn't work out that way. So summary of drug testing categories. There's different categories for drug testing. There's pre-employment, random, post-accident, reasonable suspicion, return to duty, unannounced follow-up testing. I will say you are never, ever going to use return to duty or unannounced follow-up testing if you have a true zero tolerance policy. You will never use these two. Return to duty does not mean that they went on vacation and now they're returning to duty, or that they got injured and now they're getting a return to duty in the sense that they're returning to duty from an injury. Never ever use these last two, if you have a zero tolerance policy. These are only to be used if somebody has refused or tested positive on a drug or alcohol test, ever. That's the only time these are ever used. The ones you're going to be using, and probably more familiar with, pre-employment and random. Hopefully you never have a post-accident, but it's possible. And then potentially reasonable suspicion. So if you have reasonable suspicion, then you would actually use reasonable suspicion testing. And that's what this whole training is about. It's about going over that reasonable suspicion to decide, do you have suspicion? Don't you? How do you document that? What do we do in that instance? And that's what this is all about. Okay, so random testing rates, they did change. So it used to be 50% drug, 10% alcohol. Now this is for FMCSA. There's FAA, FTA, and a lot of times you'll see FTA combined kind of with transit or even pipeline. So if you have pipeline and FTA or FTA and you have to do the DOT, the FMCSA, you might see them combined. Whichever one has the highest testing rate is the one you want to be on, or the one you want to have your drivers on. So if you're in pipeline and the regulation is 50% drug and 10% alcohol, then you can use the pipeline in lieu of the FMCSA one. Just use the one that has the higher testing rate, and that'll kind of keep you safe. As long as it's either pipeline, FTA, as long as it falls under that DOT umbrella, then you can use whichever one, and you don't have to have both. You don't have to have an FMCSA pool and also a pipeline pool, or an FMCSA pool and also an FTA pool. You can use whichever one tests higher. So FMCSA, if you're strictly FMCSA, they moved it from 50% down to 25% drug. They kept the 10% alcohol, but they moved it down to 25%. So if the reported positive rate over the last 2 calendar years are less than 1%, it will remain at 25%. This is saying that in any given year, the FMCSA can raise the required rates at any given time. So typically what they're going to do is at the beginning of the year, which nothing ever happens on time how you want it to. So at any time towards the beginning of the year, they might look at the last 2 years and they'll see it went up. The random positive rates went up to 1.1%. If that's the case, they're going to change the requirement for you to now you have to test at 50%. So for that reason, that they actually have the ability to just randomly change it every year, your testing rate can be higher than what the federal regulations say it is. So honestly, if it were me, I'm sticking with 50% and 10. I just am. It's going to make it easier. That way you don't have to worry about it. Plus, I I would rather have 50% of my people in tested, you know what I'm saying? But if you want to have it at 25%, you know, it's more cost efficient, I suppose. So just keep in mind that the FMCSA can raise it, and it's not that they're changing the regulation, because the regulation is actually not changing. This is in the regulation that if the reported positive rate over the past calendar year is over 1%, the testing rate will be raised to 50%. That's just what they have. If it's over the last 2 years under 1%, then they're going to keep it at 25%. For alcohol tests, if it is the reported positive rate over the past calendar year is over 0.05%, but below 1, the testing rate will be raised to 25%. If the positive rates are over 1%, now this is just for alcohol, then they're going to increase it to 50%. Right now it's 10%. 10% alcohol. Okay, so let's talk about the alcohol testing categories. They're pretty much the same as drugs. You got the random, post-accident, reasonable suspicion, but if you notice, now same thing goes for return to duty and unannounced follow-up testing. This is only for positives. Somebody who has tested positive who is in the SAP program. But you won't see pre-employment in here because pre-employment alcohol testing is not required. It's not required, so you don't have to do pre-employment alcohol testing. One of the things I want to say too is the instant tests are a waste of your time, waste of your money, and a waste of, honestly, driver's urine because they're useless for you for an FMCSA driver. Okay, so here is the summary. Employees in violation are subject to discipline up to and including termination. Again, that's your company policy. The DOT isn't telling you have to fire somebody if they test positive, but they are telling you that they have to go through a series of steps in order to get back in a vehicle again, and that they can do. All DOT safety sensitive positions are subject to all phases of drug and alcohol testing procedures. We're going to go over who that constitutes. Basically what they're saying is it's CDL drivers. So all CDL drivers in safety sensitive positions are subject to these drug and alcohol testing procedures, but all commercial motor vehicle drivers are subject to your company policy as well. No applicant may be used or hired as a driver until a negative test result has been received. This is what I'm saying about the instant tests. A lot of companies think, well, they'll do the instant test. They'll automatically have the results for that. They can put the driver in the truck and then he'll be driving while they're waiting for the official results. Do not do that. You are in violation of every rule there. So you have to have an official DOT negative result before you allow that driver in a truck whenever it's for pre-employment purposes. Now for random, they can continue to operate until you get that result. But for pre-employment, you cannot put them in a truck with the exception of the road test before you have that result. And it has to be negative, of course. All DOT safety sensitive position employees are subject to the rules as required by FMCSA regulations, Part 382. There are no exceptions. Nobody is accepted, nobody's grandfathered in. No, there is no, I don't have to do drug testing because I own the company. There is none of that. Even owner operators, you are one driver with one truck, you work for yourself with your own DOT authority, even you are subject to the drug and alcohol testing regulations. You just are. Nobody is accepted. There is no exceptions. So we're going to talk about drugs now. Let's talk about drugs. So some of the things to look for is the eyes. Different drugs kind of make the eyes look a little bit different. So like heroin, morphine, oxycodone, fentanyl, typically you have constricted pupils, smaller pupils. Red eyes, sometimes it's weed, but it's very kind of out there who looks stoned and who doesn't based on the way their eyes look. Depressants, some kinds can do that too. Amphetamines, so uppers are, you might have dilated pupils. The pupils, if you look at this pupil right here, it's dilated, it's larger, you see more of the black area. But that can also happen with marijuana. It's speed, heroin. So you can have heroin over here where it's constricting your pupils, but then you have heroin over here where it's dilating. So here's the point. I have very small pupils. My pupils have always been very small. So, but that doesn't mean I'm doing heroin. Just like other people's pupils are very large, that doesn't mean they're doing speed. The whole point is to look at their eyes and see if they look any different than they normally have. You normally see somebody on a day-to-day basis and you can kind of tell. If their eyes look really, messed up, not like they ever have before, then that one might be something that you kind of start thinking about, why do their eyes look so different now? Maybe they have really red eyes now and they're glossy and glazed over. That doesn't necessarily mean they're on drugs. Maybe they've been crying. Maybe they have allergies. Maybe they're having a diabetic seizure. You just don't know. And that's the whole purpose of this class, is to understand the difference between reasonable suspicion for drug and alcohol, or just the person's kind of having a bad day. That's the whole purpose for this training. So is to kind of determine that and what to do in different situations. So what is considered a violation for drivers? Drivers testing positive for illegal drugs, absolutely a violation. Involved in making or trafficking of illegal drugs, that's a violation. Using, possessing, selling, or buying illegal drugs while on company property, company business, or operating company equipment. You obviously don't want your drivers running a meth lab out of their trailer or their truck, right? I mean, so using, possessing, selling, or buying illegal drugs while on company property, company business, or operating company equipment, that is a federal regulation. They can't be doing that, period. So they can't be going behind the shop, smoking weed, and then getting in your truck and driving. That's not how it works. Even if they're not getting in your truck and driving, they're still smoking weed on your property. Not good. I understand that weed is legal in lots of states now. It is still a violation to them, and federal rules trump state rules when it comes to commercial motor vehicle drivers, period. Plain and simple. Refusing to be tested is treated as a positive result. They can't refuse. If they refuse, yeah, they cannot get tested, but it's going to be reported as a positive. Plain and simple. If they refuse to be tested, it will be reported as a positive result. Altering a specimen or a test. People do disgusting things with urine whenever they're trying to pass a drug test. So substituting one specimen for another, adding any substance to the specimen, diluting the specimen. They'll have a plastic bag and they'll tape up somebody else's urine and they'll tape it to their leg. Same with drugs or alcohol. They can't, these are the regulations, whether you like them, whether you don't like them, it doesn't matter. Just the same as me. Whether I like them or don't like them, it doesn't matter. My opinion does not matter in this, and neither does yours, and neither does the driver's. The rule is the rule is the rule. Until that rule changes, then that's what it's going to be. Improper use of prescription medications. So taking someone else's prescription, exceeding the dose of the prescription medications, even if they have a prescription for hydrocodone because they had a root canal, they can't take more than what was prescribed. And let me tell you, whenever they actually do the testing, they know exactly how much the driver took. So if he says, I took exactly what was prescribed, but the MRO comes back and says, no, they were 3 times over the cutoff level, that's what it is. They know based on the time and everything in the interview with the driver how much was actually really taken versus how much the driver said he took. Medication caused the employee to be impaired or unfit while on duty. I see this happen a lot, which is going to bring us into the over-the-counter part. A driver takes Benadryl because they have allergies. But Benadryl, it says right on the box, and I don't want to say just Benadryl, but it might say right on the box, do not take this while operating heavy machinery or equipment. This may cause drowsiness. NyQuil is the same way. It may cause drowsiness. Even though it's over the counter, if it causes them to be impaired or unfit, it does not matter if it's drugs or alcohol. It matters if it makes them impaired or unfit. So, which brings us, like I said, to the over-the-counter part. Taking over-the-counter medications that are obtained in other countries, but a prescription medication in the United States. Tylenol with codeine. You can get that over-the-counter in Mexico. That doesn't mean they can take that here. Medication causes the employee to be impaired or unfit while on duty. I said that again because I wanted to kind of make that a point, whether it's prescribed or not prescribed. Even if it's prescribed medication, they might be prescribed legitimately oxycodone for, maybe they have prostate cancer. They have oxycodone for pain. Whatever the situation may be, they cannot take anything that could potentially be and make them impaired or unfit while on duty. They just can't do that. If they have to take medication to do their job, then they probably need to go back to their doctor and get a new physical to make sure that they can continue to do that job while they're on that medication. So here's what the drug testing process is. The drug testing includes marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, methamphetamines, which is like MDMA, MDA, opioids, which includes codeine, morphine, 6-AM, hydrocodone, hydromorphone, oxycodone, oxymorphone. So here is the cutoff levels. Like I said earlier, there's cutoff levels. And this is where the MRO knows how much they took. They have their little system that can, based on the size and the weight and the milligrams, they kind of know in a good enough range to be able to testify to say this is what it is. So marijuana, and then cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, here's the different cutoff levels, and then here's the confirmatory. So if I find this funny, cutoff levels, I find this very funny. Because basically what this is saying is you can do a little bit of cocaine, you just can't do a lot. You just can't get to here. If you got 145 NGs in you, you're okay. You just can't have 150. And then the confirmatory, if they do a confirmatory, it's 100, right? So technically, no. They can't have anything in their system, but here's the cutoff levels for testing the initial test, and then when they do a confirmatory test, it actually goes down. So those are all the things they're testing for. And even though these are opioids, all of these things right here are opioids, they test to see what type of opioid they're taking, which has expanded because it used to just be the 5-panel. And then it went to kind of like a 7-panel, but it was still called the 5-panel. Now this is, there's 11 different ones that they're actually testing for. So if they don't call it 11-panel, they still call it the 5-panel. But that's because MDMA and MDA is in the amphetamine category. And then all of these other things down here, they're in the opioid category. But they do list them out separately in the test. So drug and alcohol testing process. So this is how it works. The driver, you tell them, hey, now I'm going to speak more in terms of random drug testing. So you tell driver, you got pulled for random. I need you to go immediately to the collection facility. You know, don't pass go. You get there and you do your test, and then you come back or you do whatever you got to do. But you cannot notify them in advance. So when you're ready to send them, that's when you notify them, or when they're in your office and they're ready to go. I wouldn't never notify anybody while they're on the road. Now, in some cases you have to, but if you notify them and you say, hey, based on your GPS records, I know you're in this town. I need you to go immediately from where you're at right this minute to this collection facility, and here's the address, and you can send them the address. In that case, then yes, absolutely, that's fine. But that's only when you know exactly where they are, what they're doing, and that they can go right then. Once they get there, they're going to sign in, and they're going to typically show their driver's license, but they'll sign in. Once they sign in, they cannot leave the building. So they cannot leave the view of the person at the front desk. They have to stay in that building. They can't go outside to smoke. They can't go outside to talk on the phone. None of that. They have to sit there and wait until their collection process is done. Once they've signed in, they cannot leave the building. So I've had drivers who actually got a refusal, and it was marked as a refusal, which means they got a positive test because they went outside to smoke and did not go up and say, hey, I'm going to go outside and smoke, because the person should have said, you can't, you've already signed in, you have to stay here now. But instead they just went outside and smoked, and now they got a refusal because they went outside and smoked. So make sure you tell your drivers that once you're there, once you sign in, you cannot leave that facility. That's part of the training that should be done with drivers, so they know what to expect. Once they're there, you're stuck, dude. The split sample collection for reconfirmation testing, if it's needed. So they collect the urine. The driver comes in, he signs the paper, then they call him up, they're ready to go test him. He's going to pee in 1 cup. And I say he, I know I always say he, there's plenty of she's, we're just going to stick with he. Driver pees in the cup. In front of that driver, the collector should be pouring the stuff from the cup into 2 separate specimen vials. At that point, the driver should be putting the tape over it and initialing that tape, sealing those 2 different vials, and then those vials are then sent to the lab. That's how it's supposed to work. If you ever go to a collection facility as a supervisor and you're doing drug testing and you notice that they're not following the proper procedures, then find a different collection facility, because they're going to do nothing but get you in trouble. They need to be following protocols, because otherwise your driver can come back later and say that somebody broke chain of custody and you have no right to fire him. I mean, just think of O.J. Simpson trial. If somebody breaks chain of custody, the driver then has all these things that they can say, and so do other attorneys. Don't ever allow a collection facility, because their lack of knowledge or knowing what they're doing, and there's plenty of collections facilities out there who get approved for testing, but they just are horrible. So make sure that your collection facility is doing it properly. So then at that point, now they've peed in the cup, there's certain procedures for collection facilities that they have to go through. I'm not going to go through all of that process, but you know, they have to go in, check the bathroom, turn the water off, all sorts of stuff. But the driver pees in the cup, and then the temperature of that urine is actually verified by the collector. The collector verifies the temperature. If it meets within the range, at that point, then they move forward. If it does not meet, if the temperature range is out of range, then they're going to request that the driver take another test. So they're going to say, you know what, the temperature range is out, so we're going to have to do an observed test now. That means driver walking in, pulling down his pants, turning around for the collector to see all his business. I mean, I'm serious about that. Whenever I say they have to lift their shirt, pull their pants all the way down to their ankles, butt naked, and spin around and show that collector all of their business whenever they do an observed collection. And it's not pleasant. So I haven't ever had to do one, but I'm just saying, as a collector, I know the process. So just FYI, male collectors for male drivers, female collectors for female drivers. That's just the way it's going to be. There's a strict chain of custody and control process used. You know, the driver has to be in view of his urine in the cup the whole time until all the seals are in place and the baggie is sealed and everything is finished. So the driver, they don't just take the urine, here, put it in this door. That's not how it works. The driver has to be in view of his urine at all times. So I say the driver holds the urine until you're ready to transfer it to the vials. But whatever your collection facilities process is fine. Signatures have to be done, and then the specimen is shipped overnight to the laboratory for analysis. They're all shipped overnight. And there are very few cases, if you get there at 6 p.m. and the cutoff for shipping has already happened, then yes, they're going to store it in a refrigerator because they've already checked the temperature, which is perfectly okay. And then ship it out the next day, which is fine. But typically it's shipped overnight. Even if it's shipped the next day, it's still shipped overnight. So in the lab, the laboratory performs the initial drug screen. They're looking for positive results within each individual drug class. So that's what they're looking for. They do that initial screen. The initial screening tests and the confirmation tests. So if they do get a positive, basically what I'm saying, if they get a positive and they're confirmed using this GCMS, the initial screening test and the confirmation test must meet the required cutoff levels established by Department of Health and Human Services, which I gave you that slide. You have that to know what the cutoff levels are. If confirmed after the employee review, medical review officer is notified. So here's basically what this means. They send it off to the lab, and the lab says, nope, we detected no drugs. Negative result. It's the MRO is notified, and they issue a negative result. If they receive a positive result, there's a whole other process. Now something else comes into play. If you have any questions, email me at info@readyfordot.com. You can go to our website, DOT Readiness Group. Go to LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, subscribe, because anytime I put a ton of free content out there as well as trainings like this. So whenever I do the free content, if you subscribe to our social media, you'll get notified that we actually have free content out there, of course. So make sure you set it for notifications. If you're interested in going digital and doing all this stuff digital, all your papers digital, including accident reporting, drug and alcohol testing issues, stuff like that, go to dot-ready.com and watch our demo. Schedule a demo through that website and watch the demo on the software to see what it can do and how it kind of relates to the drug and alcohol testing portion.